Early childhood development, psychology part 2, and we're going to be looking at, first off, motor development in children and infants and infancy. Well, basically, according to all the charts, and something to remember, that all children develop independently, individually. They all have different sociological circumstances. They have different parents. They have different traditions, different ideologies. So not all stage development of children is uniform, but there are some general physical stage development things that you should be aware of, so that if a child is not developing, then you should be very cognizant of that. So a 2-month-old should be able to lift its head on its own. A 3-month-old should be able to roll over. 4 months, sit up without falling over, 6 months, able to sit up without support. 7 months, begin to stand while holding onto things like a baby rail or a coffee table. 9 months, beginning to walk using things to support it, walk around the coffee table and things, walk up and down its baby bed. 10 months, be able to stand without support, be able to balance, begin to learn that. 10, 11 months, something like that. 11 months, stand alone. 12 months, begin to walk without support. 14 months, walk backwards. That's an interesting concept. Imagine if you couldn't walk backwards. How many times couldn't you open a door? How many times couldn't you open a car door or even back up into a chair and sit down? That walking backwards concept is a developmental stage. Walk up steps with little or no support. That's a big deal too. Imagine if you didn't have that range of motion and you were stiff-legged when you walked like a penguin. You couldn't take steps up. You'd have to fly up on the ice. 18 months, you're able to manipulate objects with your feet while walking, like kicking a ball, kicking a cat, stepping on a spider, manipulating your feet, being able to do that, being able to point your toe and put it into a shoe. We don't think of those as developmental milestones because we're so used to doing them, but for children, especially from infant to that age, those are developmental ideas. Those are developmental ideologies. Well, we have these stages of development. Kohlberg, he had an idea that we morally develop. He had this moral concept that we looked at the world through terms of morality, which is interesting. Okay, this is what it says. Very simple. We have this level from birth to age 9, where your morality is obeying rules, avoiding negative consequences. Children at this stage see a set of rules, typically by the parents and the school, and they define morality by the law. So if a child is told, you go to church and you sit there quietly, or you stand and sing, or you pray this way, or you use these words you can use, these words you can't, you put a napkin in your lap, you don't get up and go to the bathroom while we're eating, you may not think of those as moral laws. But in a child's world, if they break that code, if they break those moral laws, then usually they are punished to some degree, either verbally admonished or physically or mentally or all the above, or a privilege is disallowed. If they stay up all night watching TV when they were supposed to go to bed at 9 o'clock, that's a moral law. So the concept of morality far extends the 10 Commandments. It far extends something that we think is right or moral. In developmental stage, we don't understand concepts like love, hate, prejudice, anger. We're learning those things. Those things don't have words yet. We may have this intellectual intelligence that feels those things, but like Shakespeare said, a rose by any other name would still stink like a rose. So if we called love Bubba Monkey, then that's what a child would learn is love, Bubba Monkey. So in this ideology of what Kohlberg's saying, he's saying that our morality in the initial stages is rule following. That's how we develop this morality. Okay. That which satisfies the child's needs is good and moral. also. You know, if food satisfies a child's needs, then that seemed good, and good equates to morality. So on the next level, 9 to adolescence, children begin to understand what is expected of them by their teachers and their parents and their peers. Morality is achieved by these expressions and fulfilling obligations and these following these rules, but also beginning to express themselves into those rules. Whereas now a child knows that if it draws a beautiful picture, that it will receive praise. So the adolescent continues to develop this skill and continues to develop praise. And now they're working at a sign store doing signs, and they're getting money for it. So now they even have a bigger moral stake in what they have developed. We call it a skill, an ability, a talent, but they also view this, and humans view this in a lot of ways, as good. You can lift heavy objects, so you go work for a furniture moving company, and you get paid. The pay is your reinforcer. That's what's good. And having a job where you work hard, that work ethic is viewed as moral. It's viewed as good. You're not viewed as lazy, and you're encouraged. So morality for a developing human being comes in a lot of different packages, and it always is attached to the word good or bad. Bad is viewed as amoral. Good is viewed as moral. Now, of course, you have this rebellious stage where children do everything opposite. You know, we call those teenagers. So then we have, as adults, we begin to understand that people are different, have different opinions, have different rules, have different moralities, different cultures. Morality is seen as upholding values of your own group and your own culture. So this is what Goldberg is saying, is that by the time you reach adulthood, if you view a certain religious flavor from your sociological family upbringing and background, now you view that as good. You view that as moral. Regardless of what the rest of the world thinks, you are now moral. If blowing up people for the sake of your God is moral, then that's viewed as moral, okay? So it is difficult for people from other cultures, other societies, other disciplines, other ideologies to look into a cross-cultural, you know, if you go down to Brazil, they eat spiders and bugs and things and grasshoppers and stuff like that. They do in parts of Mexico and Panama and places of that geographic nature. You know, so dietary customs are viewed as good or bad. So even down to our dietary likes and dislikes, we view a type of morality. In the Hebrew culture, there's a whole culture of kosher, where certain foods are to be eaten, certain foods are not to be eaten, and we have those exchanges. So what creates this? Well, Ivan Pavlov, you know, he came up with Pavlov's dog. I encourage you to look at many different videos. Go on the World Wide Web, look up Ivan Pavlov. There's a number of different movies and a number of different things. It's very, very interesting. Sometimes it's easier to see the illustration, but it's very simple. Pavlov introduced meat powder to a dog to get it to salivate. What he found is every time he rang a bell, and correspondent with feeding the dog powder, the dog would salivate. Eventually took the powder away, rang the bell. The dog would start salivating because it recognized that ringing the bell caused the dog to salivate. Ultimately, he could just walk into the room and the dog would start salivating, just like when you get home and your dog starts jumping up and down and wants to go outside, or wants to get fed, or wants to come inside. You are the trigger. You're the reinforcer. You're it. And from that, we've learned a lot about how to get people to do what we want. Marketing is all about reinforcement. If it tastes good, I'm going to keep buying it and eating it. If it looks good, I'm going to wear it. If it smells good, I'm going to put it on me. So we've learned these things, and we've learned to manipulate it and control it. Reinforcement. One of the early pioneers in 1938 was Skinner, B.F. Skinner, and he said, reinforcement was when a child cleans his room, you say, good job. And that alone is enough reinforcement for some people. There are people who run to things. There are people who run from things. There are people who are negatively motivated. There are people who are positively motivated. Some people thrive off of encouragement and told they're doing a good job and well done and good behavior. Some people need a model of get up, move it, you need to do a better job, you're not fulfilling your task, you're not meeting your obligations, you know. So, and we all have this kind of mixed set of bags of where we're positively reinforced and negatively reinforced. Some people slow down on the road because they see a cop. Some people don't slow down on the road because they see a cop. Some people slow down on the road with or without a cop there because they think it's responsible to drive that way and that's the way they want to drive. Some people only wear a seatbelt because they're afraid of getting a ticket. Some people only won't use their cell phone only because in a car because they're afraid of getting a ticket, not because it's a responsible thing to do. So everybody has a positive and negative motivation. Everybody has a mixed set of worms. Some people work without pay, who just love to work and would work regardless. Some people will only work for pay. And then there's some things you do for pay and some things you do just for fun. And it turns into work, but you do it for fun anyway. So positive and negative reinforcement is not a clear-cut thing, but there are some factors. First, there's positive reinforcement. That refers to anything that you go to work, you get paid, that's a positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement. Well, that's any type of reinforcement that decreases a response. So if you're not wearing your seatbelt and you get a ticket, that's negative reinforcement. So now you wear your seatbelt. So you have decreased your response of not wearing your seatbelt. That may seem a little confusing. A child touches a hot burner on a stove and learns that it's hot, and so now they are reinforced. Now they avoid fire. So they have been negatively reinforced. You don't study for a test, you make an F. You study for a test, you make an A. So in that you have both positive and negative reinforcement going on. Then you have punishment. Punishment is a type of reinforcement that you need to inflict on your children, that need to occur often. No, in actuality, punishment should be a last case resort. You should redirect, retry, retalk, and then if you have a child who wants to run out in the street, do you think you should allow them to run out in the street and kill themselves? If they're a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old when it's a busy street? No. Punishment in this case needs to meet the level of protection. Maybe it's you restrict them to the backyard. They can no longer play in the front yard until they can be responsible. Well, in our society, punishment goes on all the way up to permanent incarceration or even execution. Punishment has many different phases, and punishment should meet the exact object of discipline need. If you steal a cookie, then you need to have cookies taken away. If you're late for work, you get your pay docked. If you don't study on a test, you should make a lower grade. If you don't run fast enough, you don't win the prize. So punishment comes in lots of different forms, and a lot of times we have self-punishment involved. Now, extinction. Extinction is something where you remove a behavior, and extinction is different than punishment in the extent that, take a person who's trying to quit smoking. They recognize the behavior that they want to stop. Now, they go through a series of stages and processes to try to minimize that addiction, because now the addiction is both mental, physical, it's spiritual. They've got a full range of things going on, but they're trying to make this extinction occur. They're trying to make it so that they no longer have the desire, mentally, physically, or spiritually, to light up. Well, you have a lot of social dynamics. The places they go, the people who smoke with them, what they eat, the things, having a cup of coffee and a cigarette, going outside, waking up in the morning, so forth and so on. Stress, you have a lot of different factors that go into extinction. So how are things extinguished? It's not as important of how they're extinguished, but the fact is that extinguishing can be a positive reinforcement as well as a negative reinforcement. We think of extinguishing a behavior such as a child going to a restaurant and screaming the entire time. And so you go, well, we're no longer going to give you ice cream at the restaurant, or we're going to take you out and you can't go to eat with us. That's a negative type of extinction. A positive type of extinction could be a coach going, okay, guys, if you don't work as hard, you're going to lose the game. You lose the game and you go, okay, now, you want to win the game, you want to win the championship, then you need to stop the opponent from scoring. So you want to extinguish their ability to score. So you are now being reinforced by positive, and you are also acting as the enforcer or the extinguisher on them. And so by extinguishing a behavior, you're receiving benefits. Most extinguishing equals positive behavior benefits. I know that we have this idea of that how often things happen equal how often things are good or bad. And we call those fixed ratios and variable ratios, and it's really important when you're dealing with children. In dealing with children, you need to be consistent. A variable ratio is a child gets up from their seat when you're teaching and you only tell them to sit down every other time. That's a variable ratio. Or you only tell them every third time. That sends a real mixed message to a child. A fixed ratio is, okay, if everybody sits here and is good and listens to the teacher, then we're going to have 2 extra minutes at recess. And every time you do that from now on, we'll get 2 more minutes at recess. Wow, you know, I've seen kids almost kill themselves for an extra 2 minutes at recess, sitting there holding their breath, trying to, the worst kids in the class who are wiggling around and squirming and going around, and you go, I'll let you stay out for 2 more minutes if you behave. So the idea is that your consistent ratio. Now, do you have to have, as adults, variable or fixed? Well, we like fixed paychecks. We like that, but we also like bonuses. Those are variable, based on performance. We don't need to see a cop every mile to know that we could get a ticket. We understand that there are speed signs that say 30 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour. Those are variable ratios of intervals that we go through, and we adjust our speed based on those variable ratios, recognizing that at any point along that line, if we break that ratio, we could get a ticket. So it is not really cut and dry. It's not a absolute. So there is in reinforcement theory, there's all sorts of dimensional aspects, and it's worth studying. I would encourage you to take some time out to really look at that negative, positive, look at extinction, because a lot of behaviors in children can be positively and turned into a reinforcing cycle of positive reinforcement that ends up with a conclusion of extinction of bad behavior. Let's talk about memory, forgetting, learning, why it seems to be. Have you ever met somebody, they introduce themselves and you don't remember their name? Have you ever gotten a new phone number and you don't remember the phone number? You have to dial it a number of times. And you've actually seen people stand there and punch the air, go, you know, and your Social Security number. I've seen people count off on their fingers, go, you know, 32176. And there is a difference in memories. Memories seem to have variances. One of the things you need to understand about recall and memory is things that are attached to highly emotion-driven things, events in your life will be memorable. Whereas you may have married your high school sweetheart, but you remember your prom, you remember your first date, but you had 1,000 dates in between then, and you just don't remember them all. In your childhood, you may have 2 or 3 Christmases you remember, but you don't remember them all. You remember just a few. You may remember one bicycle and you may have had 10. You may remember one Barbie doll, but you had 100. You may remember one favorite pet. You may have had lots of different animals in your lifetime because there's an emotional attachment. Emotions seem to be the deepest trigger of memory. That seems to be one of the places that we encode. Now that's the word I wanted to get to, encoding memory. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. We encoded that as a child. How come you know the language you know? Well, that's your original language, your language of origin, your footprint language, your encoded language. That's a language that can never be erased. Regardless of what you do, you can't remove that language, so it is encoded to you. There are things that you don't have to think about. 2 plus 2 equals what? You didn't have to add that up. You didn't have to go 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 plus 2 equals 4. You know it because it's encoded. You know, so 2 times 3 equals 6. It's encoded. So encoding has to do with simplicity. It has to do with memory. It has to do with triggers. That's another word I want you to learn, triggers. Triggers are things like smells. You know, you can go in and smell oatmeal cookies and maybe that reminds you of your grandmother's house. Maybe you can smell a certain perfume and it reminds you. My mother smoked cigarettes and I smelled her brand a number of months ago and I went, ah, there's my mom. You know, I remember because it was very distinctive. So all of our 5 senses we utilize to remember things. How things feel, how things taste, how things sound, how things smell. And those encoded memories always lead to a chain of events. That's why things like music have to do with our emotional ability. You hear a really sad, mopey song, and you get sad and mopey, or you hear a real patriotic song and you stand up and you're patriotic, or you hear a song about a hero or a lost dog or real heavy driving music and you're all excited and want to do aerobics. Okay. So you've got different temperaments within your body that react and respond to these encoded things that you learn through experience throughout your life. So memory is a lot more than learning something. So that's why when my kids were young, how we would learn spelling words is I would have them do them kind of in a B, C, D, E, F, G fashion. They would learn words like B-A-D is bad. You know, if they were having trouble with a word, I would make them do it through this kind of mnemonic type thing, kind of a cadence. Well, if that didn't work, then I would invoke physical. So they would have to go do jumping jacks, go B-A-D, bad. Okay. So what they were doing is they were taking a learning object, a spelling word, and they were now incorporating it into their own voice, into their mind. They were doing it over and over again. They were doing it physically. They were engaged in the learning process. Just sitting and listening to somebody talk is not being engaged in the learning process. Learning is a process. Memory is a process. If it was easy to remember everything, when we shook somebody's hand and they said their name, we would remember it. When we got a new phone number, we would remember it. When we got our license number, we would remember it. We would be able to balance our checkbook. We would always remember that. If just hearing or seeing or reading fixed learning, then learning would be fixed, but it's not. Learning is a process, and we don't all learn things equally, and we don't all learn things at the same time. Some people have a tendency to be better at math, so they learn math quicker. Now, the other person over here doesn't learn math as quickly, but they still learn it. So, if this person who seems to be relatively good at math, or they learn it with ease, knows 2 plus 2 is 4, and this person over here who has difficulty in math, but they learn 2 plus 2 is 4, then the learning is equal. They now have the same footing. They now have the same knowledge. Regardless of how easy or not easy it is, learning can be equal. Now, all it meant was that person number 2 took longer to learn it. That has to do with intelligence. In essence, The more intelligent you are in a specific area, the more talent you have, the more able you have in an area, be it reading, be it math, be it sports, be it art, music. You have these different talent levels. Well, you become equivalent once they're learned. Now, if I could play the piano, do I think I could ever compose and play like Mozart or Beethoven? Absolutely not. That's not where my talent is. That's not where my genetic structure is. That's not where my gifting is. So, just because you learn something, because I can learn an equation in physics, does not make me Einstein. So you do have to look at both gifting and talented. As badly as I want to play professional basketball, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to make a team. I couldn't even make a junior high team because of my height. So regardless of how good I could dribble the ball or shoot the ball, there were people who could do it better. So intelligence is relative to the situation too. What if you're a great cook? What if you're an incredible cook? Man, that means that you could go be a chef, or you could go be the best cafeteria cook in the world, and people love your food. The point being is, I can know the recipes, I can learn the recipes, I can even memorize those recipes. It doesn't give me the talent. So intelligence, talent, genetic makeup, learning as a process, it is all in the mix of learning. But one of the relevant things about memory is that it is emotionally driven for the most part. Our memory is emotionally driven. That's one of the reasons why we have a problem remembering numbers. Now, if you won $1,536,536, that was cash, I'll bet you could remember that number. Because if you actually won that much money, all of a sudden that number would become emotionally linked. But I've taken lots of math tests in my lifetime. I can't even remember taking a math test. I can't go back and go, oh wow, that was a wonderful math test. I barely can remember who my math teachers were. That's not an indictment of how good or bad they were. It just means emotionally I was not engaged in that. So one of the challenges for all teachers, for all people, for all communicators, is to emotionally engage their audience, to emotionally, consistently reinforce their audience to learn. And learning through participation is one of the best ways to do it. That's why there's call-in talk shows. That's why there's game shows. That's why in the movies, you don't just have somebody reading you a book and telling you a story. You have an interactive story that draws you into it, that you can identify with. You hate the bad guy, you love the heroine, you love the good guy, and then all the other people are fillers, and you really don't have much emotional response about them. You love the funny character who always makes the wisecrack. So emotion plays a large part of your learning process and memory and intelligence. Your body has memory. It has autonomic memory, and this autonomic memory works like this. You don't have to think about breathing. You don't have to think about your heart beating. You don't have to think about your liver functioning. You don't have to think about your muscles, because your muscles actually have memory. You can actually make them come back to life. They remember what it was like to be young and strong, and so when you start working out again, your muscles go back to that memory. And so that's another reason to have children up and active when they're young, and not just sitting in front of a computer or a TV and studying all day. They need to be outside sweating and playing, get used to heat, used to things, so that they can be environmentally conditioned, so that when they get older, they can stand up to the strain. There are some absolute conclusive evidence that children who are cloistered inside all the time and avoid heat, avoid sweating, avoid swimming, avoid running, avoid playing, end up with chronic health problems as an adult because of that factor. So it also goes to the stress level. Your environmental response to your stress through activity is one of the reasons God gave us that ability to move around and move fast. There's a reason why we can run. Well, let's talk about memory again. Sensory memory is something that's tactile. You know, we feel things, we see things, we smell things. That's your sensory memory. You know, if you've heard the old saying that says blind people become very, very aware by way of compensation. You can hear things when you're blind that you can't hear when you are seeing. Taste and smell become very relevant. Touch, that's why Braille works. You can read by touch. So sensory memory is significant. Guitar players don't have to look at the strings. Really good typists or keyboardists don't have to look at the keys. People who can run a 10 key by touch. There are many things people can do that are just natural. Artists can actually feel the paint flow onto the canvas. So sensory memory comes through training. I know in football many, many years ago, you could tell. I played on defense, and when the offense would push this way, I knew that the play was going the opposite way of where they were pushing. So I didn't have to look at where the ball was going. I could feel. Sensory told me through training and learning and experience. So sensory memory comes through experience and emotion. Now, displacement. Displacement begins from the time we're born. We displace things. We don't necessarily forget them, but we displace them. A child begins by rolling over. Well, I can roll over, and I'm old, but that is not my primary form of transportation. A child learns to crawl. They can still crawl when they're 10. I can still crawl today, sort of. But my primary mode of human development was walking. So a child learns to walk. So in essence, they have learned or they have displaced that memory. They have moved it to another category. Crawling is something you do when you've lost something on the floor. Rolling is something you do when you're playing on the ground with a child. You're rolling around or putting out a fire on you or something. You know, walking is an acceptable social, cultural, normal, moral way to transport your body. That has been displaced. So now, displacement happens in all things at all times. In fact, learning is all about step displacement. You learn to add and subtract, then you learn to multiply and divide, then you learn fractions, and you learn algebra. And so you're accumulating knowledge, but you're at the same time displacing that, moving it to the background. It's time to learn something else. Moving that to the background, it's time to learn something else. One time you rode a trike, then you rode a scooter, then you rode a big wheel, then you rode a bike, then you drove a car. So it isn't that you forgot how to drive a big wheel, it's just that you displaced it to the back. So displacement is a form of learning, but it's also a form of memory, putting your memory in categories in your mind. And it happens automatically. Long-term memory, the LTM, that is your permanent storage. That's your language. I don't have to wake up and go, now how do I speak English today? I don't have to remember. It is natural. It is almost autonomic. Okay, stroke victims who are neurologically paralyzed have lost the ability frequently to speak and articulate. They have not lost the knowledge or the memory of language. They still can communicate, and they understand, they just can't verbalize because they have a paralyzed speech processing center. So that is a separate function. Your autonomic, your ability to go roof, 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 or meow, or oink, oink, you know, make noises, is not connected to your memory of knowledge, your memory of language. And you don't have to think about it. Now, there are certain things that happen as you age, where you get dementia, you lose touch, whatever, and so your language capacity could diminish. It is said that the expansion of vocabulary and language also increases the expansion of mind tissue and learning. For instance, the average person has between 10 and 18,000 words within their vocabulary that they can understand easily and that they could articulate. They have about 10,000 that they can articulate easy. They have about 3,000 to 4,000 that they use on a regular term, on a regular day, or a regular week, or a regular year. Now, you expand that to William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare had a vocabulary of about 54,000 words. It's been estimated. So people who become accomplished writers, accomplished scholars, accomplished literates, people who become accomplished mathematicians, they not only do they learn to speak a new language, they learn to speak rocket science. If you're a physicist and you're learning to put somebody on the moon, you've learned a whole new synthetic language. Same thing with engineering, same thing with computer, same thing with any type of industry, any type of mind-expanding thing. And along with that, it seems to drag everything else into it. Just as being in the military expands your knowledge and language of that area, you have an understanding that somebody who hasn't been through boot camp understands. So it expands that. Well, short-term memory. Short-term memory is a tool. It's not good and it's not bad. It's, what's the passcode to that? 2345. Okay, 2345. You don't ever have to use it again. Fortunately, God gave us short-term memory so that we don't have to store every single thing we learn. Hi, I'll be your waitress for the day. My name is Sue. Great. You see Sue one time, she brings you coffee and a hamburger. Well, I don't have to memorize Sue's name or background for her to bring me a coffee and a hamburger. And in culture, you know, we do that to be polite, to introduce ourselves. And short-term memory is very, very valuable. Now, unfortunately, I deal with it later ideas like shoving everything into a closet. You know, I'm going to shove it in the closet, I'm going to shove it in the closet. It's all disorganized, it's all bundled up, you can't find anything, it's chaotic. When if you would just take it one thing at a time and you'd place it into the proper place and turn it into long-term memory. Your short-term memory is a tool, and it's a tool for you to use. It's how we memorize things to get through the day. And so that is an important tool. So we aren't just given to long-term memory. I want to shift a little bit now and go to one of the stage developmentists, and he did this on much more of a psychological level than he did on a environmental or a social moral level or on a psychosexual level or on a infant to birth level and that type of thing, you know. So Maslow, we're looking at Abraham Maslow, and he came up with a hierarchy of needs. That's become very, very popular once again, this idea of hierarchy of needs. And we're going to start off at the bottom. And what he's saying is your social needs, your psychosocial needs, food, water, shelter, oxygen, sleep. He's talking about your phenotypic needs, your physical needs. These needs, these physical, social needs that every human being on earth needs. I absolutely agree with him, 100%, that we have all the same needs universally. We came walking out of the garden, Adam and Eve came out of the garden needing to go to the bathroom, needing to eat, needing to breathe, needing to reproduce, needing to do everything that we need to do today with headaches, with bad aches, with stomach aches. So it became a real concert of needs. And Maslow simply recognized the fact that we all have universal needs. Now, he said the next need is safety and security. I agree with that too. You can take a 5-year-old, plop them into the woods, and they'll find, with no adults, and they'll find a way to cover up at night with straw, to eat wild berries. Now, they may not flourish, but they will seek security, and they will seek safety, and they'll find a cave, they'll find something. We have a need to survive. We have this survival instinct in us, and we have this desire to run away from things that hurt us and run towards things that help us. And that's kind of our natural instinctual level, and we have a need for safety. The safer we feel, the more adept we are. The more our bills are paid, the more money we have in the bank, the more secure we feel financially. The more our house is locked and the more secure we are in a subdivision or a block or on our farm or wherever, the safer we feel. You know, the safer the car is rated and we travel down the road, the safer we feel. So safety is a need. You may not think of it as a need, but it is a need in the human mind and body. We need emotional. He's saying, okay, we need belonging and love. Well, he's talking about our emotional Geiger counter, you know, the thing that registers our wants and desires, the thing that registers what we need emotionally to be strong or weak. We have this need for love, we have this need for care, we have this need for justice, we have this need for self-esteem. So we're a complex emotional package. The next area is, he says, esteem needs. We need achievement, education, respect. So he's saying that for our emotions to function well, we have a certain level of integrity within our esteem that we need to meet. It needs to be realized. And what he's saying is, when we've gotten all this stuff together, he calls it self-actualization. We realize to the fullest potential who we are. So Maslow has this pyramid, and he has these needs, and at the top is a self-actualization, at the bottom is this need for water, food, safety, things like that. He goes from very basic to ultimate, this fulfillment of who we are. Well, I'm not 100% sure it's that simple, because I think we are very complex individuals. We have a spiritual side to us. We have an emotional side. We have a mental side. We have a physical side. We have these sides. We have complex social interactions. Whereas you might be very successful with one child, another child may not be successful. You may have a really good relationship with one person you work with and a real bad relationship. You may have a child in your class who is flourishing, another child who's not. So if my self-esteem is built on my ability to communicate with all the children in my classroom, or all my students, or all my graduate students, I'm going to be a really, really small person. I'm going to feel really bad, because I got to tell you, not everybody functions at the same rate and the same level. And you go, well, that's not your responsibility how they function. But if that's how it makes me feel, then it's a reality. So Maslow has this very simplistic idea that if we meet these needs, we will accelerate to this self-actualization. To some degree, it's probably correct. But on the other hand, because we live in a complex, psychological, multi-diverse culture, with many different dynamics, and one person may be good at math, and the other person may be good at English, and the other person may be an artist, the other person may be a professional athlete, but can't do a lick of math or put two sentences together. Okay, so does that make them a failure? Not necessarily. What it does, it means that we all have different talents, and interests and schemes and things. So in recognizing that your children in your classroom have this too, it is critical for their success that you want them to self-actualize, but you also want to meet their primary needs and give them the building blocks so that they can expand their talents and gifts. That is not your full responsibility. You're just part of the process.